Welcome back. Today, we're diving straight into this visual masterclass to unpack one of the most fascinating and, frankly, kind of tricky mechanics in all of economics. We usually think of market changes happening one at a time, like maybe a sudden trend spikes demand or a brand new factory boosts supply. But what happens when a market gets hit with a simultaneous shock? What happens when both the supply and the demand dynamics rise together at the exact same time? It is a complex multi-shift scenario that honestly trips up even seasoned students. But stick with me, because by the end of this explainer, you're going to have a perfect, totally intuitive grasp of exactly how to map this all out. To master this classic six-mark concept, we're going to follow a really straightforward four-part agenda. First, perfect balance, equal proportions. Second, demand dominates the market. Third, supply dominates the market. And finally, we'll wrap up with the masterclass takeaway. So, here's the central mystery we are solving today. If both demand and supply increase simultaneously in a market, what actually happens to the price of that commodity? Think of the market as this giant tug of war, right? On one side, you've got eager buyers pulling for more goods, which, as we know, usually drives prices up. On the other side, you have producers just flooding the market with more goods, which typically drives prices down. So, when both sides pull at the absolute exact same time, who wins? Well, before we start drawing our shifting curves, let's quickly establish our baseline so we all know exactly what starting point we're tracking. Equilibrium, which we always label as point E on our graphs, is literally just a situation in which the quantity demanded of a commodity perfectly equals the quantity supplied. It's that fleeting moment of market harmony. The price, right at this exact intersection, is our equilibrium price. And every single scenario we look at today is going to start from this peaceful point E, right before the simultaneous shocks hit. All right, let's get into it. Part 1, perfect balance, equal proportions. Now, I want you to watch the exact mechanics of these shifts on the screen. See the initial demand curve, DD, and the initial supply curve, SS. They're meeting right there at point E. Now watch as both curves shift rightward to D1, D1, and S1, S1. The real key thing to notice here is the distance. They are shifting by the absolute exact same amount to land at our new intersection point, E1. And you know what? The outcome of this perfect balance is incredibly unique. If you trace the line straight down from our new equilibrium point, E1, you are going to see that the equilibrium quantity has jumped to the right from OQ over to OQ1. Basically, we're selling a whole lot more product. But look over at the y-axis. The equilibrium price remains completely undisturbed at OP. Why? Because the upward pressure on price from all that new demand perfectly canceled out the downward pressure from the new supply. So the price literally didn't budge a single cent. How cool is that? Okay, moving right along. Part 2, demand dominates the market. Our source text actually provides a super clear rule for this specific dynamic. It states, and I quote, "When demand increases in greater proportion than increase in supply, then the equilibrium price will increase along with increase in equilibrium quantity." So let's break down exactly why this happens mechanically. Imagine a scenario where a massive celebrity just endorses a specific type of sneaker. Suddenly, boom, there is a huge jump in demand. The buyers are completely rushing the stores. Now, the manufacturers, they're trying their best to keep up, so there is an increase in supply, but it is a much, much smaller jump. The sheer volume of new buyers completely overwhelms the smaller trickle of new products actually hitting the shelves. So, the really crucial point here is that because demand dominates, the upward pressure is so much stronger. If you were drawing this out, you would shift your demand curve way far to the right, but your supply curve only just a little bit to the right. And as a result, that new intersection point gets pushed physically higher up on the graph. The equilibrium price is basically forced up from OP to OP1, and the equilibrium quantity sold also increases from OQ to OQ1. The buyers want it so badly, they are absolutely willing to pay a premium, and that just drives the price right up. All right, let's flip it. Part 3, supply dominates the market. Take a really close look at that initial intersection E again. Now, look at the shifts happening here. The rightward shift of the supply curve is visibly significantly larger than the modest little rightward shift of the demand curve. In this scenario, producers are pushing an absolute mountain of goods into the market, while the buyers, well, they're really only showing a slightly increased appetite for it. So trace the lines from this new, much lower intersection point, E1. Because the market is totally flooded, producers have to slash their prices just to get rid of all their excess inventory. The equilibrium price falls significantly from OP straight down to OP1.
But here's the catch. Because things are now cheaper and there is still slightly more demand than before, the overall quantity sold continues to climb, moving from OQ to OQ1. Okay, let's bring it all together. Part 4, the masterclass takeaway.
I seriously want you to take a mental screenshot of this matrix right here. It's like a cheat sheet. If it's an equal proportion shift, the price is totally unchanged and quantity increases. If demand is greater than supply, the price rises and quantity increases. And if supply is greater than demand, the price falls. But yep, you guessed it, quantity still increases. This right here is your definitive go-to framework for structuring any advanced market answer on this topic. To distill that entire matrix down into 3 golden rules you just can't forget. First, notice that quantity always increases in these simultaneous increase scenarios, no matter what, literally every time. Second, the direction of the price depends entirely on which force is dominant. Demand pulls it up, supply drags it down. And third, if the shifts are perfectly, exactly equal, they cancel each other's price pressure out entirely. We have thoroughly conquered what happens when both forces increase today. But right before we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a really provocative thought straight from the postscript of our source material. What if both demand and supply decrease simultaneously? Just think about that. Based on the exact same logic we just completely mastered, which force is going to win your market then? I highly encourage you to grab a piece of scrap paper, draw out the curves yourself, and map out those 3 proportional possibilities for a simultaneous decrease. Honestly, once you can do that, you have truly mastered the market mechanism. Keep visualizing the data, keep learning, and thank you so much for joining me today.